Good evening everyone, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about random things on this planet without extensive research to help you night-night faster. So, a few days ago, a woman named Paige Trobney was leading in the annual Iditarod sled dog race on International Women's Day. And the entire Mushing community was very excited about it, saying that they've been waiting for a female winner for way too long. For a sport where men and women compete on equal footing, this is a very big deal. Unfortunately, the excitement was short-lived. While Paige led the race for a while, a marathon runner named Jesse Holmes, a man, ultimately crossed the finish line first and won the 53rd Iditarod in 10 days, 14 hours, 55 minutes, and 41 seconds. For those of you who don't know what the race is, it is not a race where people actively run, maybe a little bit, but the main star of the show is a pack of sled puppies. Imagine you're bundled up like a human burrito, standing or sitting on a cooler that doubled as a seat behind a team of 14 furry athletes racing across 1,000 miles of Alaskan wilderness. The wind is howling and you are navigating through snow-covered mountains, frozen rivers, and forests that look straight out of a survival movie. Every March, mushers and their dogs blaze a trail from Anchorage to Nome, covering terrain so extreme it makes your winter subway commute look like a walk in the park. Back in 1925, Nome was hit with a diphtheria outbreak, and the only way to get life-saving medicine was via dog sled teams racing against time. To honor the serum run, the Iditarod sled dog race was later created in 1973 by Joe Reddington Sr. and a group of friends. The fastest finish is held by a man named Mitch CV, who followed me on Instagram at one point. I almost fainted, of course. In 8 days, 3 hours, 40 minutes, and 13 seconds. While also becoming the oldest winner. The youngest winner of the Iditarod history so far is Mitch's son, Dallas CV, who is also the only musher to have won the race 6 times. His last win was in 2024, where he rolled over everyone else, despite suffering from a 2-hour time penalty for not gutting a moose properly on the trail after it stepped on one of his dogs. In 2023, the winner was Ryan Reddington, the grandson of Joe Reddington Sr. During the same year, Jason Mackey was named the most inspirational musher. He carried his brother Lance's ashes and spread them in places he knew Lance liked. Outside of Squidna, on top of Rainy Pass, on the river near Ophir, and on the river near White Mountain. And why is this so important? Because Lance Mackey won the race 4 consecutive times during his lifetime. He was deeply inspired by his father, Dick Mackey, who was a co-founder of the race along with Joe Reddington Sr. This year, Brenda Mackey, the granddaughter of Dick Mackey, niece of Jason and Lance, attempted to complete the race for the 2nd time. Her father, Lance and Jason's half-brother, Rick Mackey, was the winner in 1983. Do you see a pattern yet? With that being said, I would like to apologize for the sort of misleading title of the video. I am personally a very big fan of the Iditarod, and Dallas CV is my hero. I always find it hard to follow the race during the years Dallas ran because even though there were so many amazing mushers, I always wanted Dallas to win. Among so many mushers who are all talented and hardworking, could Dallas really be crowned the king of the race if he didn't benefit from the family legacy? I forgot to mention Dan Seavey, Mitch Seavey's father, and Dallas Seavey's grandfather was also a participant of the first Iditarod race ever, alongside Joe Reddington Sr. Nepotism in the mushing world is not nearly as bad as you think. People in the community don't really refer to it as having an advantage over others, but rather something to feel proud of. They are proud to be following the footsteps of their family members, and no one bats an eye to the fact that they've got more exposure to sled dogs at a young age. They have the resources to watch and learn, and sometimes even inherit the entire kennel. And this is huge in comparison to someone who didn't grow up surrounded by mushers, who became a handler for a different musher in their adulthood, fell in love with mushing, then borrowed a puppy team just to finish a qualifying race to the Iditarod. Of course, it is easier to win if you come from a multi-generational mushing family. This is a very unique occurrence of the Iditarod. While in basically everything else in the world, nepotism is seen as a bad thing, it implies that the nepo baby has no merit of his own and is actively taking away a position that should have belonged to a more hardworking person in the first place. However, when it comes to mushing, nepotism in air quotes is largely accepted. And here is the reason why. Yes, it is a great honor and a huge accomplishment to win the Iditarod. It is at the same time not that great, at least in comparison to the NBA. Mushers had to pay to enter the competition themselves, find their own handlers, sort out their own means of transportation, prepare all of their supplies along the trail at each checkpoint. The prize money at the end is determined by the final placement. The amount for the average musher or even a top 10 finisher is not that enticing when you take into consideration the time, energy, and money the mushers had to pour into the race all on their own. Another thing is that the sport is not that popular. When I was watching the live stream of this year's first place finish, Jesse Holmes, there were barely over 1,000 people online, and this pool of audience was from all over the world, and it was for the overall champion and not just a random finisher. There are two things the mushing world is doing so much better than the rest of the world. They never humiliate a bad musher, and they've also allowed women to compete from the very beginning and never discriminated against anybody. Even though a successful musher is often praised, mostly for their care of the dog team and their sportsmanship, a not-so-successful musher is never labeled as bad or lazy. In fact, the last musher to cross the finish line each year gets a special Red Lantern Award for their perseverance. Just being a finisher carries its own honor. This is a sport where everyone is a winner as long as you finish. The competition is more of Mother Nature rather than the people. Therefore, very rarely are the slower teams made to feel inadequate or less than the really competitive ones. Now, let's talk about women. If a sport has allowed women to participate and compete against men since the very beginning, should 50% of the win go to female winners? The answer is no. As egalitarian as the rules are, the Iditarod is still very much largely dominated by men. Out of 53 races so far, only 5 were won by women. It was a split between only 2 women, Libby Riddles, who had the first win in history, and Susan Butcher, who won 4 times during her lifetime. In the more recent years, Ali Zirkle, Paige Drobny, Jessie Royer, and a few other women all made it extremely close to finishing first, but ultimately didn't quite make it. In 2025, the last female to win the Iditarod was 35 years ago. I would get into great trouble if I were to say that maybe degendering sports is not such a good idea. It seems like it could in fact hurt women's chances of being successful when they are stacked against opponents who are physically stronger than they were. Mushing is not solely based on strategy. It also combines outdoor survival and taking care of a dog team while being on a time crunch. The reality is, it does take a lot of strength and endurance. The race officials of the mushing community has been very proud of the fact that this sport is not gendered. It allows anyone who qualifies to participate regardless of age, gender, sexual orientation, or identity. However, the general consensus is that the current race structure is fair and the next female champion should come naturally. If we look at the Iditarod alone, it is hard to pinpoint the exact reason for the lack of female winners. And the scary answer is, maybe there is none. Even though the trail itself is the only factor determining a musher's success. A fact about the race is that most winners in Iditarod history are middle-aged or slightly older men. This is the interesting world of the Iditarod sled dog race, where everyone is allowed to compete against each other using whatever they're able to find within themselves. And sometimes the end result isn't what everyone hoped for. As a longtime fan of the race, I honestly don't think there's something to be changed.